This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. You're listening to episode 60 of Lex Out Loud, Writing Science Fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this show. I am Lex Starwalker, and I am out loud with you today, yet again, talking about writing and science fiction and all those kinds of good things. So today is going to be a bit of an eclectic episode, not too scattered, I hope. But I'm going to talk a little bit about where I'm at in my writing these days. I don't think I've given an update in a while. And then I wanted to share some thoughts with you that I had recently in regards to naming chapters within a novel. But before we get into that stuff, I thought I would do some of our early episode stuff that we do sometimes, some announcements and what I'm enjoying creatively right now. As far as announcements, I just have one thing that I want to announce today, and that is that I just put up a new post on my blog at lexstarwalker.com all about manuscript formatting in Word, specifically as it applies to novels, although you could use these techniques for any document you have in Word. They become more and more useful the longer your document is. But specifically what I go through in this blog post is it's really a tutorial teaching you how to use the outline features of Word involving the different styles that you can use and define in Word and how to use the navigation pane. And yeah, it's kind of a best practice that I've figured out when it comes to writing a novel in Word, how to set everything up so you can really easily find what you want in your novel. You can easily navigate to any given chapter or subchapter that you want. It makes it really easy to rearrange the order of chapters if you want to do that. And finally, the most important part of it, I think, is it allows you to very quickly reformat your entire novel to any guidelines or parameters that you want, and to do so in just literally a few seconds, a couple mouse clicks, and the entire novel is reformatted and there will be no errors or mistakes. You don't even have to check it to make sure. You can sleep well at night knowing that all the changes were made and it didn't create any weird things within your novel. And you might be wondering, well, why would I want to reformat my whole novel? Well, the thing is if you're going to be submitting to agents and or editors, they will have submission guidelines that are quite specific about how they want the manuscript that you send them to be formatted. They're going to ask for possibly specific fonts and font sizes, specific line spacing, margins, how you begin chapters, all kinds of things. So what this method that I teach in the blog post does is it allows you to define these different styles that different editors or agents might want and easily switch your novel from one to the other, again, without introducing any errors or problems. This also allows you to write the novel and read the novel yourself however you want. So for instance, maybe you're submitting to some agents that want you to use Courier font 12-point size. And maybe like me, you're not a huge fan of the Courier font, and you really don't want to be staring at Courier font all these months that you're working on your novel. Well, you can use whatever font you want to write your novel. And then when you're ready to send it to the agent or the editor with a couple mouse clicks, you can make all the changes to how they want it. And this can also do things like, maybe you use italics in your novel, for instance, when people are having direct thoughts, and maybe a particular editor doesn't want you to use italics. They instead want you to underline. And that is the kind of thing that using any other method other than what I show you would be a huge pain in the butt and would take hours, if not days of work to do that and make sure nothing got screwed up. With this method, it literally takes a few seconds, and you can change all the italics to underline or whatever you want. You can have small caps, you can have bold, whatever you want. And it makes it all really easy. And it's also following best practice. So if or when you do get a publisher and they want you to send your manuscript in, it's already going to be formatted using best practice, which means you're not going to have to go through and reformat the whole thing by hand. For instance, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about here, this is really about using styles and style sets in Word. And so, for instance, if you have some italics in a paragraph, you don't want to just highlight those words and hit Control I to make them italics. Because the problem with that is as soon as you make any kind of change to the font or anything like that, you could lose those italics. So instead, you use the italic style, and then you can change things all you want, and you're not going to lose anything. It's not going to screw anything up. Or another example is normally an agent or an editor is going to want you to indent the first line of a paragraph, and you don't want to be doing that with the tab key. You don't want to, at the beginning of each paragraph, hitting tab to indent that first line, because when they go to, send it to layout or typesetting or whatever they're going to do with it, they can't have that. It's going to screw all kinds of stuff up. So the best practice is instead to use the paragraph body style and to set up that style so that it automatically indents that first line of each paragraph for you. And also, just using tab to do that, even before you have to deal with a publisher, is going to, lead to some headaches of your own when you maybe move things around or delete things or whatever. Having all those tabs in your document can cause a lot of problems. And if you do it that way, or you have done it that way, then you probably know what I'm talking about. So I will warn you, it is an extensive post because I kind of assume you don't know anything. And so I step by step show you how to do this, how to set up your manuscript, and how to use all these features. And there are lots of screenshots and everything to help you. So if you're someone writing novels or any kind of, if you're using Word to write documents that are more than a page or two long, I would really recommend you check this out and you learn how to do this, because it may seem like a lot at first. If you've never done any of this and to go through this, you might think, oh my God, this is a lot to set this up, and there's no way it would be worth it. Trust me, it will be worth it. And you can get to where you can do this very quickly. And really what takes the time is setting up the first style set. And then usually any additional style sets are going to be modifications of that first one. The modifications will be fairly minor. You might change a font, you might change line spacing or something like that. But it will take a fraction of the time to set up additional style sets as it takes to set up the first one, because you're just making minor changes to it. But yeah, check that out. That's at lexstarwalker.com/blog. And please, if you do find it useful, please share it around with people. And if you know anyone who might benefit from it, please let them know. So I've been reading a lot of books lately, and one that I would like to mention on the show that I really enjoyed was called Ninth House by Lee or Lay. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Barduka or Bardica. Sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but just look up Ninth House and you'll find it. And yeah, I got this actually from Stephen King's reading list that he has in the back of his book on writing, where he lists a lot of books that he's enjoyed that he thinks reading these books will teach you to be a better writer. We'll talk a lot on this show about how most of the quote high level stuff about writing that you learn on your own by reading. They're not going to be taught to you in a class or on a YouTube video or a podcast or anything like that. And you learn these things by reading. And so he gives a list of around 300 books through the various lists he gives in the back of On Writing of books that he recommends that you can read and learn something from to be a better writer. So that's how I found out about Ninth House. It's the first book of a trilogy, and I really enjoyed it. And it's really well written. The genre isn't normally my cup of tea, but it was well written. It was a well told story. I was really interested in the main character, and so it kept me going through the whole book. I don't know what you would call the genre. I would call it contemporary fiction with just a splash of the supernatural in it. It's definitely not urban fantasy. There aren't any werewolves or vampires or anything like that. But it's a story that takes place in the modern day, and things are pretty much the way they are, except in this story, magic is real. But it's not like a Harry Potter kind of thing where you're kind of like, if there's this much magic in the world, how do people not know? The magic is very understated and very secretive. And yeah, I thought it was a really cool book, a fun story, and really well written. So if you're looking for something to read to maybe level up your prose a bit, check it out. And yeah, I guess maybe I could say what I learned from it. So, it's hard often to put into words what you learn from reading someone who knows what they're doing. But a couple things that I did know, or I guess it's really one thing, is she does a really great job of setting the stage, of describing locations. And that was one of the things, other than the main character, that really kept me interested in the book was the way she described locations. I'm someone who is very sensitive to ambiance, the vibe of a place, if you will. I will choose or reject a restaurant based solely on that. I mean, the food's got to be good too, but there are places that have great food that I don't eat at because I don't like the ambiance there, or at least I won't eat there. I'll take it to go. But yeah, so that's something that is important to me just in day-to-day life. And I realized reading this book that it's something that's also important to me as a reader, that one of the things that will make me like a story is if I like where it's taking place and it seems like a cool place I'd like to visit. And Ms. Barduka, if I'm saying her name right, just really has a flair for describing places. And, in examining some of these descriptions and trying to figure out what she's doing that's working for me so well. And the one thing I really noticed is, she's always describing more than just sights and sounds, which is, cliched advice you've probably heard a million times. But I noticed in the really cool descriptions of places that she often will include any scents that are about, and also she'll include the lighting and how the lighting affects how the character experiences the place. For instance, a lot of the rooms that they're in through the story have stained glass windows, and so the light coming through the stained glass, it's not just normal color of sunlight. It's colored by the stained glass, and it kind of changes the ambiance of the room. And I noticed that in these room descriptions that I really liked, that really pulled me in, that she was often, in addition to mentioning what the character saw and heard, she was mentioning, the scent of the wood or something like that, and also the lighting. So, my takeaway from it was to focus a bit more on my place descriptions and to make sure that I'm pulling in elements of lighting and sound if I'm not already. And as to the recommended reading list by Stephen King, there's actually 3 or 4 of them. It seems like every time they do a new release of On Writing, he'll put together a more updated list. So the first list, I think, is stuff up to around 2000 publication date. And then the second list, I think, is like 2001 to 2009, something like that. But I'll have links. Some of those are online on some blogs that I found. So I'll have links to those in the show notes for this episode at lexstarwalker.com if you want to check them out. I also made my own version of them. I wanted a printout of these lists so that I could kind of keep track of what I've read, what I want to read, what I'm not going to read. And so I put them all in a Word document just so that I could print it out and have one big list. And I shared that with the Discord server. So if you'd like that document, go join us on Discord and you can find it there. Real quickly, I thought I'd talk about a couple television shows I'm really enjoying right now. They're both kind of strange in a way, ironically. So first, I'm not going to say a lot about, because I've already talked about it on the show, I know, is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Love it, love it, love it. As of recording, episode 10 has just been released. It's the finale episode for the first season. I haven't watched it yet, but I saw the other 9, and every single one of them was excellent. So if you're someone who maybe hasn't been super keen about the recent Star Trek shows like Discovery and Picard, and they weren't really true Star Trek to you or what you were really wanting, if you're someone who was really wanting something more like the original series or Next Generation, then this is the show for you. It goes back to the episodic format of the original series and to some degree Next Generation. And it's really excellent. It's phenomenal. I loved every single episode, and even the original series and Next Generation, there were definitely episodes that I didn't much care for, but at least season 1 of this show, they're all great. I highly recommend it. And then the other strange show I've been watching, just finished up yesterday actually, is the 4th season of Stranger Things. And man, this was a great season. I was a little late maybe getting on the Stranger Things bandwagon. I mean, I've watched it since the beginning, but I definitely, especially the first season, I personally thought it was a bit overrated. I didn't think it was as much as people were making it out to be, although I did enjoy it. But something that I've found with the first 3 seasons of the show is I would get about halfway through the season before it really hooked me, or before I was really, digging it. It was kind of ho-hum for the first half of the season, and then I got into it. But this most recent season, season 4, I mean, it just hit the ground running for me. Even the first episode, I was totally on board. It was really great. And there wasn't really much, if any, what I felt was like downtime, or, where there wasn't much happening. It was really great. And I didn't like how they split the season up into 2 releases to force people to have to subscribe to Netflix for 2 months. I didn't care for that, but I did like how the last 4 episodes were significantly longer than than an hour, like the regular episodes are. I think the last episode of the first part was like an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. And then they released the last 3 episodes, and the first 2 of those were around an hour and a half. And then the final episode was 2.5 hours long. So they were, the last, 4 episodes of this season were basically movies. Each episode was a movie, and it was really excellent. So, I do think it was a little overrated in some of the earlier seasons, but if you haven't watched Stranger Things, I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix. And at this point, you can binge watch the first 4 seasons, and it's really great stuff. If you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, which I know a lot of my listeners are, then there's a lot of D&D references in it. In fact, the big bads of each season are, at least their names are based on a D&D monster or character. They're really not anything like the D&D versions, but they at least use their names, which is cool. And the characters in the show actually play D&D. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's a great show. I highly recommend it. Oh, and the music is awesome. All right. So now that we got through what I'm reading and watching and enjoying right now, I thought I'd start out in our main section and just kind of bring you up to date on what I've been doing as far as writing lately. So first, in regards to Critical Balance, which is the book I've been working on throughout the life of this podcast so far. I've gotten feedback now from another couple of my alpha readers, and I still have a few alphas that I'm waiting on, two of which I think I will be getting their feedback back within the next week or so. And then the final alpha may take a little longer than that, which is fine. But while I'm waiting on the alpha feedback, I'm alpha reading for one of my alphas. So reading her novel now, and so I'm about halfway through that, and it's looking like about the time I finish that, I should have feedback from those other two alphas. And so at that point, I'm going to start version 4, start my next revision of Critical Balance. And already with, I've still got 2 more coming in, but already with the alpha feedback I have quite a few changes I want to make to the book for version 4. And, it's funny. I've had 2 waves of alphas. I sent it out to the first wave of alphas, got feedback from them, and that was I sent them version. Well, I guess they were kind of within the first wave. There were 2 small subwaves. So the first couple alphas got version 2, and then the third one got version 3, and then the second wave of alphas all got version 3. But when I got feedback back from my first 2 alphas who had looked at version 2, I was so excited because they gave such great feedback and really showed me some weak points in the book, and I knew what I wanted to do to shore those up and make those better. And I was really excited for how much better version 3 of the book was going to be than version 2 was. And it's so funny because now I'm experiencing the exact same thing with this next wave of alpha feedback that's coming in, that's feedback on version 3. I already have all these great ideas from the feedback of things I can do to make it even better. And I am so excited about what version 4 is going to look like. And yeah, just super, super stoked about that. So yeah, once I finish this alpha reading I'm doing for someone else, I'm going to do version 4, do a revision of Critical Balance. And at that point, I will probably, right after I do version 4, I'll probably turn around and do another revision for version 5, because version 4 is going to be making all these changes I want to make based on the alpha feedback. But then after that, I want to do another revision for version 5 that will be just a polish, where I really start looking at the prose, which is not really something I've done up to this point, because, until I'm fairly confident the book is close to its final form, I'm not going to waste time looking for adverbs and adjectives and passive voice and all that stuff, because it's kind of a waste of time to do that too early in the process, because you might end up cutting out chapters or whole parts of the book or rewriting them. And then all that polishing you did was kind of for nothing, because you just cut it out or you rewrote it anyway. So I think the best time to do that is right before I send it to the betas. The alphas should spot the big problems, the big structural things that I need to fix. So right before I send it to the betas, I do a final polish and really focus on the prose and just making everything as tight as I can. And then, the betas are really getting the best of what I can do at that point. And then get feedback from them, probably do another revision, that'd be version 6, and then start querying agents. And that's the plan as far as that goes. So I have a little bit of time yet while I'm finishing up this alpha read that I'm doing, and while I wait for these other couple alphas to come in before I start the next revision. And then also while I'm doing that revision, I that'll probably take a few weeks or something. So during that time, I plan to do some more research and world building for book 2. One promise that I made myself when I started this series is that I would take time between each book to devote to doing more world building and research also if needed, so that, between each book, after I finish each book, before I start the next one, I flesh out the setting more and more, add more to it, deepen it, add deeper layers to it, things like that. So I do know, what the second book is going to be about. I even have a title. It's going to be called Citizen Zero, which is kind of funny that I have a title already, but it just happened. It just came to me while I was sick and trying to think about anything other than how sick I was. It just kind of popped into my head whole cloth. But I know that the second book is going to also take place in Union City. So I'm going to focus on fleshing out Union City even more. One thing, specifically that I'm going to do is I have some very general diagrams I've made of the cylinder at this point, kind of like where the different districts are and things like that. But I want to flesh that out more and make a more detailed set of diagrams for the cylinder that I can refer to as I'm writing the second book. And then, just adding in more about Union City that hopefully at least some of it will make it into one of the books at some point. I might also spend a little bit of time giving some more thought to what's going on Earth and what Earth is like at this time, as it's possible that the story may go there in book 2. I don't think it will, but as I largely am taking a discovery approach with these books, I really don't know for sure until I'm done. So, it's something I definitely want to give more thought to, because, eventually Earth is going to come up and what's going on there. Although I am trying to keep the focus on these space stations, because that's what it's really about. It's not about, Earth per se. But I might give some thought into that and flesh that out a little bit. So if you are interested in beta reading for Critical Balance, it's not too late to let me know. You can head on over to lexstarwalker.com and check out my article on the blog about alpha and beta reading. And I have a form there that you can fill out to be a beta reader. And would definitely, I have enough at this point, I think, but I'd be happy to take on some more if people are interested. So and then once I send out version 4 or 5, whichever it ends up being, to the beta readers, I'll finally be able to start writing book 2. And I'm really looking forward to getting into that. This whole kind of limbo I've been in, where, well, I guess it's not limbo, but I'm in this phase now where I'm editing the book I just wrote and, revising it and sending it to alphas and all this stuff, that it's kind of been dragged out a lot longer than I planned. Because first I moved, which kind of shot a 2 or 3 week hole in the middle of everything. And then I was sick for a month. I was really hoping to be into writing the next book by now, but those things kind of derailed me. But in a way, it kind of worked out for the best, because, this way I can remain focused on Critical Balance and doing these revisions. Because really that's the top priority right now is getting Critical Balance to the point I can send it to agents. So until it's ready to send to agents, that's the number one priority. And then, once it's quote finished, as finished as it can be at that point, and I start querying agents with it, then I can shift focus to writing the next book. I wonder if I can get to a point or get to a place where I'm able to be editing one book while I'm writing another book, because that's really where it's at. That's really where I'd like to be, because then, I can be a lot more productive and put out books more quickly. But I don't know if I'll be able to do that or how good I'll be at doing that. I kind of have a one-track mind, so I'm I'm a little worried that might not be the greatest method for me, that I'm better off just staying focused on one thing at a time. But yeah, it's something I want to experiment with. All right, so I have what may seem like a bit of a strange topic today. It seems a little strange to me. You might be wondering, how on earth, Lex, are you going to have an episode about naming chapters? Like, who cares? What's it matter, right? But I thought I would talk about it today. And yeah, it may seem like an odd topic. And until very recently, it's not something I ever gave much thought to. Would I name it chapter and what would I name it? Wasn't very high on my priority list or what I thought was important. A lot of books don't even have chapter titles beyond, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, right? And then some books do. Some books will actually, each chapter has a title and they're all different. So when I started writing my book, Critical Balance, I didn't really give much thought or any thought really to whether or not I would name the chapters or what I would name them. I think I just decided that I would name them just to help me remember what was in each chapter. But I didn't put a lot of effort into coming up with the, quote, perfect chapter name. I mostly just put the first thing that came to me and went on. Like, I didn't spend any time at all on naming the chapters. The only thing I really paid attention to when it came to naming the chapters was making sure that there wouldn't be any kind of a potential spoiler in the chapter names. I figured maybe I would keep the chapter names in the final version of the book, or maybe I would get rid of them at some point, or maybe, I'd keep the ones that I thought were good, that I liked, and then I'd come up with better ones for the rest. I don't know. I didn't really know. And, kind of a funny aside here, I can't help wondering if maybe I overthink the title of a book. And the reason is because, like I just said, I just used whatever came to mind for my chapter titles. I didn't agonize over it. I didn't really worry too much about it. And yet I ended up being happy with all of them. I didn't change any of them. I thought they were all fine. I didn't feel like I needed to replace any of them. So I wonder if maybe the key to titling a book is just using what comes to mind and not worrying about it at all. The title of the first book, Critical Balance, it took me a bit to come up with that. But like I said a little bit ago, the second book, Citizen Zero, that title just popped into my head one night. So yeah, it's an interesting thought. And I do think that a lot of us spend way too much time and effort agonizing over the title of a book. I've been told that it doesn't really matter, that chances are good when you get a publisher, they're going to want you to change the title anyway, because they're going to have people that come up with a good title. So yeah, it's not really a big deal. So I do think, we probably worry about it more than we need to. So, whether or not you name the chapters in your book, it probably doesn't matter. Some novels have chapter names, some don't. And, most readers probably don't even really notice or care one way or another. But it recently occurred to me that there is a really good reason to name your chapters, even if you don't end up keeping those chapter names in the final version of the book. And the reason I think it's a good idea, it's definitely a good idea for me, is because these chapter titles are a great reminder to you later of what happened in that chapter. And those reminders will come in very handy when you need to write a summary of your book to give to an agent or an editor. So the process of querying an agent or an editor is going to vary depending on the particular agent or editor involved and what they want from you. But a general example of how it might go is, you might find an agent that you're interested in who's accepting submissions, and, they tell you to send them a query letter and the first chapter of your manuscript up to a certain number of pages or words. So you do that, you send your query letter and your first chapter. The query letter is kind of a combination of a cover letter, like for a resume, and also a teaser for the story that you want to send them. So in this letter, you introduce yourself as a writer to the agent or editor. If you have any noted accomplishments or whatever, you would mention that. And then you give a brief teaser of the main idea and the main conflict of your story in the hopes that that teaser will intrigue and interest the agent or the editor enough that they want to read the first chapter that you send along with it or whatever you send with it. Hopefully, if they like the chapter you sent them, then they're going to at some point, ask for you to send the entire manuscript, and they're going to read the whole thing. And that's, that's what you're hoping for, right? But at some point in that process, before they ask for the entire manuscript, or maybe with it, they will probably ask you for a summary of the book. So the teaser in the query letter just kind of whets their appetite, hopefully, to make them want to learn more about your story. So it's kind of like the trailer for a movie, right? Like it doesn't tell you everything about the movie. It doesn't tell you how it's going to end, but it gives you a general idea of what the movie's about. And really, it's just trying to pique your interest so that you want to see the movie. On the other hand, a summary gives all the important events, and all the important parts of the story, and also tells how it ends. So these are really hard to write, these summaries. Usually there's going to be a page requirement. They might want 2 pages or 5 pages or whatever. But summarizing an entire novel in a couple or a few pages is not an easy thing to do. Now, one piece of advice that I sometimes see given about this is it's suggested that you write a brief summary of each chapter as you write it. So the idea is, as you're writing that first draft, when you finish a chapter, before you go to the next chapter, you write a short little summary of what just happened in that chapter. Honestly, I don't think that's very good advice. That seems very inefficient to me. For one thing, it's breaking you out of the rhythm of drafting, and writing a summary of the chapter you just wrote is not writing the next chapter. It's stalling your momentum, and it's dangerously close to editing the chapter that you just wrote. And also, it's just going to be inefficient because, no one gets a novel 100% right the first draft, right? So you're going to be doing numerous revisions, and during those revisions, you may cut entire chapters out. You may completely rewrite chapters. You may add in new chapters. So to spend time during the first draft summarizing each chapter, every chapter that you remove, that was wasted time. Every chapter you completely rewrite, that was wasted time because that summary is no longer relevant. So yeah, that's not the time to do that. It's not a very smart way to do it, I don't think. But what this advice is getting at is the idea is while you're writing it, it's very clear in your mind what's happening. Where, 6 months down the road or whatever, when it's time to write the summary, suddenly it's hard to remember everything that happened or get it in the right order or whatever. But I think there's a better and an easier and a more efficient way to do that than trying to summarize each chapter as you write it. And I think that solution is chapter titles. And I discovered this completely by accident. As I said, I named my chapters in critical balance. And, with the exception of the first chapter and the last chapter of the book, I could not tell you what happened in a given chapter based on its number. So I can tell you what happens in chapter 1. I can tell you what happens in the last chapter, which is chapter 42. But if you ask me what happens in chapter 13, I have no idea. I would have to go open the document and go look at chapter 13 to have any clue what happened in chapter 13. I have no idea. But my 1 or 2 word chapter titles are enough that I can remember what happened in them. So if you ask me what happens in the chapter called Coercion, I can tell you. Even though it's now been months since I wrote the book and weeks since I last worked on editing it, I still, you could name any of the chapter titles and I could tell you what happens in that chapter. And I think I'll retain this information for quite some time. I mean, maybe not forever, but probably at least a year or so, or maybe until I start writing the next book in earnest, and maybe that'll kind of overwrite my memory of this book and its chapters. But I'll definitely retain it long enough for it to be a huge help for me when it comes time to write a summary for the book, which would be after I do the final draft. So after I get it back from the beta readers and I do my final revisions, then that is the point to write the summary, because now I know, what the finished book is like. So at that time, when I want to write my summary, all I have to do is open my manuscript in Word, and I have all the chapters listed in the navigation pane there. I don't have to scroll through the book or anything. They're all just listed there in the navigation pane. And again, you can check out my blog post on manuscript formatting to learn how to do that. But I see all the chapters there. I see all their titles in order. And it would be very easy at that point to write a few sentences about the most important things that happen in each given chapter, because the title will be enough to bring it to my mind and, help me remember what did happen in that chapter. So voila, I have a first draft of my summary done already, easy peasy, just going through the list of chapters, letting the name of the chapter spark my memory, and then writing a few sentences about what happened in that chapter, and put all that together, and I've got the first draft of my summary. And now all I need to do is worry about the page count, and if it's going long, take out things that don't really have to be in there, that aren't that important, clean it up, pretty it up, all that kind of stuff. But usually when people talk about writing summaries, what they refer to as a hard part of it is remembering what happens in the book and being able to distill that down to like, what's the really important stuff that needs to be in the summary? Because, if it's 2 pages, you can't tell every little thing that happens in a novel in 2 pages. You're going to have to prioritize, what's really important. And yeah, having chapter titles will help do that, because it will jog your memory of what happened in that chapter, and you won't have to go and reread it again. Or at least that's my experience, and that's how it seems to work for me. So I thought I'd share that with you. So personally, when I do my chapter titles, I have a few guidelines that I've set for this to keep in mind. The first one I already mentioned. I don't want any possible spoilers in a chapter title. I don't want a clever reader to figure something out before they should because I gave it away in a chapter title. Some readers will read the table of contents before they start a book or before they finish it. So you could even have the title of one of your last chapters could spoil something earlier in the book if you're not careful. Some readers will flip through the book and just see the chapter titles ahead of where they're at in the story. So I think that's important, not to have any possible spoilers in the chapter titles. Number 2, the titles should be concise. My chapter titles are almost always 1 or 2 words. And if there's a third word, it's going to be something like of or the or a. I really try to keep my chapter titles to just 1 or 2 words. Number 3, they need to be at least somewhat descriptive, at least enough to remind me of what the chapter's about, while also following guideline number 1 of no spoilers. And really what I'm shooting for here with a chapter title is ideally before a reader reads a given chapter, when they read the title, because it's on the first page of the chapter, the title really means nothing to them, or at the very least, it gives them no clue what might happen in that chapter. But after they finish the chapter, then it becomes clear how the title of that chapter is related to what happened in the chapter. So it's kind of like good foreshadowing, right? Like beforehand, it doesn't give anything away, but then after they've read the chapter, they can see why that was a great name for the chapter. So this might sound tricky, and I don't know, maybe it is, but I haven't had any trouble with it myself so far. So, it could be that just I'm good at doing this, or it could be it's just not that hard to do. I don't know. But yeah, I think a big part of it is, the attitude of, this doesn't have to be in the finished book. And I'm not really, I don't really care. The only point of this chapter title is for me to remember what happened. I just do the avoid the spoiler thing just in case I want to keep it, I don't have to then worry about that. But yeah, I feel like that mindset gives me the freedom to just like put whatever comes to mind. And at least with the last book, I ended up liking all of them. Guideline number 4, there's no need to agonize over chapter titles. Use the first thing that comes to mind that follows the guidelines. You can always change them later. Or number 5, they can just go away in the final version. You can just get rid of them. If I like the titles I came up with, I can keep them. But if I don't like them, or I just decide I don't want them, then I can get rid of them. No big deal. Or I could change them. Whatever. It's not a big deal. So, yeah. That's really all I have to say about chapter titles. So I'm curious, those of you who write novels out there, do you always name your chapters? Do you never name your chapters? Do you sometimes name them and sometimes not? I'm curious. My first novel, Dawn of Endless Night, I named those chapters too. And really, in a way, for that book, it was even more important because this book I just finished, Critical Balance, for the most part, is all told from the point of view of one character, where my book, Dawn of Endless Night, had numerous point of view characters. So another thing that the chapter titles helped me with that book was remembering who was the point of view character for a given chapter. And that's something else you can do with chapter titles that I've seen books do, is if you have multiple point of view characters in the book, the chapter title of a given chapter could just be the name of the character who's the point of view character for that chapter. So, if I have one point of view character is Tia and my other point of view character is Minji, then, all my chapter titles will be either Tia or Minji, so that I know, and the reader knows, who the point of view character is. Another thing that you'll see done a lot is if the story jumps around between different time frames, a lot of times that will be given in the chapter title. So you might have some chapters are in the present and some are in the past, or some are in the year 2022 and the others are in the year 2030. So the year, or whether it's present or past, could be the chapter title as well. So yeah, those are all, great ways to approach it. And yeah, they can help the reader if it's in the final version. And even if they don't make the cut to the final version, they can help you in just remembering what's where and what's what when you're editing, and also help you when you write that summary. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me today for episode 60 of Lex Out Loud. If you have anything you would like to share or comment on, or a question or anything like that, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker, and you can call my voicemail 951-465-5391. Finally, join our community on Discord. Would love to see you in there and connect with other writers and listeners. You can find links to all these great things in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. So once again, thank you for joining me today. And I hope I hear from some of you about whether you name your chapters, if you always do, if you never do. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And whether, like me, you've found them to be helpful during the editing process, and also when it comes time to write a summary. So I'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, keep writing.